we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
I'm going to start with a quote, all right? And I'm not going to tell you who said this, but I read it for the first time a few days ago, snapshotted it, posted it on my social media pages. It says this, quote, "When I became convinced that the universe is natural, that all the ghosts and gods are myths, there entered into my brain, into my soul, into every drop of my blood, the sense, the feeling, the joy of freedom. The walls of my prison crumbled and fell. The dungeon was flooded with light, and all the bolts and bars and manacles became dust. I was no longer a servant, a serf, or a slave. There was for me no master in all the wide world, not even in infinite space. I was free, free to think, to express my thoughts, free to live in my own ideal, free to live for myself and those I loved, free to use all my faculties, all my senses, free to spread imagination's wings, free to investigate, to guess and dream and hope. Free to judge and determine for myself, free to reject all ignorant and cruel creeds, all the quote-unquote inspired books that savages have produced and all the barbarous legends of the past, free from all the called and set apart, free from sanctified mistakes and holy lies, free from the fear of eternal pain, free from the winged monsters of the night, free from devils, ghosts, and gods. For the first time, I was free. There were no prohibited places in all the realms of thought, no air, no space where fancy could not spread her painted wings, no chains for my limbs, no lashes for my back, no fires for my flesh, no master's frown or threat, no following another steps. No need to bow or cringe or crawl or utter lying words. I was free. I stood erect and fearlessly, joyously faced all worlds. And then my heart was filled with gratitude, with thankfulness, and went out in love to all the heroes, the thinkers who gave their lives for the liberty of hand and brain, to all the wise, the good, the brave of every land, whose thoughts and deeds have given freedom to the sons of men. And then I vowed to grasp the torch that they had held and hold it high, that light might conquer darkness still." I posted this quote on my social media wall and I said, "He gets me," because I feel the same way. Coming out of a high control religion, I was scared at first, but then I felt freedom. I felt the oxygen. I wasn't controlled. No gods, no masters, right? I get to discover every day and I get to take ownership and agency of my own life. And I felt like this quote encapsulated so poetically much of that. And it wasn't written last week and it wasn't written 15 years ago by one of the quote unquote new atheists. And I'm going to get back to that. It was written by a man who was born in 1833. He was nicknamed the Great Agnostic. He was an attorney, son of a preacher, and perhaps one of the greatest writers and speakers of the last how many hundred years, Robert Ingersoll, who has been called the most remarkable American most people never heard of. I hear people talk about the new atheist, and for those who don't know what that is, 15 or so years ago, we saw a resurgence in conversations about atheism, and we saw It was Dawkins, Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett, right? Dubbed the Four Horsemen by somebody. And their books and debates and speeches and all of those high-profile efforts that were going on became headline news, and the national and international conversation about non-belief, atheism, religious criticism, etc., kind of surged during that time. And so I think when people talk about the new atheist, they may be trying to chapterize that particular cultural moment. But, and I've said this before, and I've used Ingersoll as an example, and George Bernard Shaw, and Bertrand Russell, and Mark Twain, and even some of the founding fathers. What these quote-unquote new atheists were saying was compelling, and much of their writings changed my life. Some of those debates and speeches propelled me forward on my journey. I'm not negating the power of it, but what they were saying was not new. Not really. These were not the first people in challenging highly religious cultures to go hard at religion, superstition, high control, fundamental cultures. These people were out there on the front lines. I was given the honor of being the keynote speaker at the Robert Ingersoll Birthplace Museum's 30th anniversary. Why they invited me, I have no idea. Because I'm not a great mind. But I was affected by his work. And so they brought me out to sort of cap the day. And it was a charming, amazing, wonderful day. We're all outside crammed under this tent, 75 degrees. And all of a sudden the thunder and the rainstorms move in and we're all huddled underneath. And yet we pressed on and the rains cleared and everybody left encouraged. I think we all just had a tremendous time. But it was also an education for me about Ingersoll beyond what I already knew. And I kind of want to introduce you to the writings. And I brought some great quotes, some excerpts from some of the stuff this guy had said in his life that I think could have been written last night. And I'm like, how much has not changed about the world we live in? The fanatics have always been around. The high control, God-invoking, Bible-thumping moralists have always been around. Robert Ingersoll. He was born the 11th of August, 1833. His dad was a minister. He was a preacher for the Congregationalist Church. This is a pretty fundy church. They had a lot of Calvinistic influences, a lot of self-flagellation going on and Bible literalism going on, but not John. John Ingersoll's up there from the podium, and he was in many ways kind of preaching humanism, right? It's funny, we see this a lot as pastors and reverends and whatnot who become more and more egalitarian and humanitarian. They preach a little less Bible and a little more humanity. And I think that's what John Ingersoll was doing. And the clerics freaked. This man is not preaching our doctrine. And some of these churches actually held trials. In fact, there was a famous trial in Madison, Ohio, where the church put him on trial. And it ended his career as a pastor. They said, well, you're a good guy. You might even be a good Christian, but you are not a proper minister. You're not preaching the correct things, and so you're out. And I wonder if John's son, Robert Ingersoll, kind of watched the treatment of his dad, how he was vilified and kind of tarred and feathered in that way, and that maybe propelled him on his journey to become a rationalist and a critic of the church. I'm going to spare you most of the biography, which you can look up for yourself, but just the basics. Robert Ingersoll became a lawyer. He once defended a guy who had been accused of the crime of blasphemy. And if you didn't think America had blasphemy laws, yes, we did. The year was 1887. The accused guy was a man named Charles B. Reynolds, and he was an ex-evangelical. He left the faith and became a vocal critic of his former religion. And doesn't that sound familiar? Right? To me and you and a lot of us out there. Okay. So he's going from town to town, city to city, and he's talking about state-church separation. Enough of this Christian nationalism crap. This is improper. It's not equal. It's unconstitutional. By the way, the Bible is a contradictory, immoral, intolerant, error-filled mess. Right? So he's going around saying, We got to separate the state and the church, and the Bible is crap. And the churches in the cities in which he put up his tent to speak lost it. There were organized efforts by Baptist churches, Methodist churches, Catholic churches. They would launch whole campaigns. They would go to the tents and they would shout him down. They threw food at the guy. They chopped down his tent ropes. And so the whole tent would collapse upon everybody and they'd steal what was underneath. And sometimes Charles Reynolds had to grab his wife and kids and they had to run for their lives. It was the satanic panic, not of the 1980s, but of the 1880s. And the reason that Charles Reynolds was brought up on trial is because New Jersey actually had a blasphemy law, had a blasphemy statute. You could be fined for blasphemy about $200, which is today's equivalent of $6,400. So they could fine you over $6,000 and they might put you in jail for a year. God will not be mocked. And yet there was that pain in the ass Charles Reynolds, going from city to city, town to town, putting up his tents and speaking heresy and handing out these pamphlets that dared to say that the Bible is not inerrant. It has errors in it. Blasphemy. This must be brought before a judge and jury. And there in the courtroom representing Charles Reynolds would be the great agnostic, Robert Ingersoll. And Ingersoll didn't call any defense witnesses, no character witnesses, nothing like that. Ingersoll's whole defense was he stood up and he gave a 3-hour speech. And this guy could give one hell of a speech. And he talked about the merits and importance of protected blasphemy. And I've got a blasphemy quote from him coming up in just a few that's just awesome. So he goes up and he gave this amazing speech. But it was not enough. The jury came back with a guilty verdict. Still, I think because Ingersoll's words had been so powerful and because this whole trial was just getting blasted by the newspapers who called it a circus. This is just crazy, right? They gave Charles Reynolds a slap on the wrist, a very, very, very small fine, which Ingersoll himself paid. And except for one case in Maine that happened in the early 1900s, that was the last trial against criminal blasphemy in the United States of America. It just changed the game. It changed the culture. And this trial is a landmark court case. It's often cited by historians when they talk about blasphemy laws here in the United States. Robert Ingersoll joined the Union Army, afterward became Illinois Attorney General. Politics was going to be a problem for him because, he was an agnostic. And he hated slavery, and he thought that women ought to be treated and held in regard and paid equally. And he also said that gods were the phantoms of the fearful, the weapons of the bigots and the privileged powerful. Oh, hell no. He was not ever going to be elected to high office with that attitude. His birthplace in Dresden, New York, the house which I was honored to visit and tour, has been listed on the National Register of Historic Places. I believe it's open every weekend if you are in the area. Now, let's imagine this guy who died of a heart attack in 1899. Let's say he was here right now in 2023. I would bet that if he looked around, he would go and dig out some of his old material, hell, all of his old material from the 1800s, and it would stick like glue to the stuff that you and I are seeing right now. He looks around today at the Bible-banging satanic panickers, the Christian nationalists, the bigots, the zealots, and then he reads aloud what he wrote in 1881. He says, "Whoever imagines himself a favorite of God holds other people in contempt. Whenever a man believes that he has the exact truth from God, there is in that man no spirit of compromise. He has not the modesty born of the imperfections of human nature. He has the arrogance of theological certainty and the tyranny born of ignorant assurance. Believing himself to be the slave of God, he imitates his master and of all tyrants. The worst is a slave in power. State-church separation. This is Ingersoll, 1873. Quote, "The Declaration of Independence announces the sublime truth that all power comes from the people. This was a denial, and the first denial of a nation, of the infamous dogma that God confers the right upon one man to govern others." 6 years after that, Ingersoll said this: "It probably will not be long until the churches will divide as sharply upon political as upon theological questions. And when that day comes, if there are not liberals enough to hold the balance of power, this government will be destroyed. The liberty of man is not safe in the hands of any church." This statement, published in 1892, "I will not attack your doctrines nor your creeds if they accord liberty to me. If they hold thought to be dangerous, if they aver that doubt is a crime, then I attack them one and all, because they enslave the minds of men." I would love to have seen Robert Ingersoll go toe-to-toe with the apologists. These people who are speaking in defense of the faith, whether it's in a church or in a debate setting or on Twitter or X or whatever we're supposed to call it, right? The people who are saying the Bible is still a good book, even though it endorsed horrible things that were not good, but they are still good because context or mysterious ways, or you need the Holy Spirit or what. I would love to see Ingersoll engage these good book defenders. Again, his words from 150 years ago. He said, "The believer in the inspiration of the Bible is compelled to say that there was a time when slavery was right, when women could sell their babes, when polygamy was the highest form of virtue, when wars of extermination were waged with the sword of mercy, when religious toleration was a crime, and when death was the just penalty for having expressed an honest thought. He is compelled to insist that Jehovah is as bad now as he was then, that he is as good now as he was then. Once all the crimes that I've mentioned were commanded by God, now they are prohibited. Once God was in favor of them all, now the devil is their defender. In other words, the devil entertains the same opinion today that God held 4,000 years ago. The devil is as good now as Jehovah was then, and God was as bad then as the devil is now." Oh, the blasphemy. When I came out of my Christian faith, I was still weird about heresy or blasphemy. I mean, logically, I knew these are all myths and monsters. Like, in my brain, I realized that. But emotionally, I still carried that baggage. And somebody would say something that had been deemed heretical, and I'd wince just a little bit. And Ingersoll opened my mind on this and gave me a perspective on heresy and the necessity of heresy that I had not before considered. He summed it up so well. 1874 in Heretics and Heresies, quote, "Whoever has an opinion of his own and honestly expresses it will be guilty of heresy. Heresy is what the minority believe. It is the name given by the powerful to the doctrine of the weak. Heresy cannot be burned or imprisoned nor starved. It laughs at presbyters and synods, at ecumenical councils on the impotent thunders of Sinai. Heresy is the eternal day, the morning star, the glittering herald of the day. Heresy is the last and best thought. It is the perpetual of the new world, the unknown sea toward which the brave sail. It is the eternal horizon of progress." Heresy. His take on it evolved my own thinking. In fact, I wrote a book 8 years ago called Sacred Cows. And it's kind of a romp around the world. But between the lines is this message that no idea is sacred. If somebody looks down their nose and says, no, you're not allowed to question this or criticize this, I always look back at them and I say, congratulations. This thing is now number one on my list. Right? I mean, they're trying to protect thought, but ideas should not be protected. They have to earn respect. When you challenge the sacred, so often you're speaking to power. You are participating in critical thought, the thought that sails us forward toward the eternal horizon of progress. There can be no progress unless you and I are willing to look power in the face and commit what they call heresy. Is it any wonder that high-control fundamentalist cultures discourage doubt, right? Doubt's a sin. Doubt's weakness. Doubt's an attack. If you are strong, you would be sure of yourself. You'd never doubt. Doubt is called a sin in the Bible. The one who doubts is like a wave of the sea. That person will be blown and tossed about like the wind and should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Doubting Thomas was chastised by Jesus for daring to say, "Oh, great, you're resurrected. Please show me the nail holes." He doubted, and he was called out and chastised. And yet people use doubt in all the other aspects of their lives, and it helps to keep them from being scammed or harmed. A stranger pulls up next to your kid on the street, opens the car door. "Hey, your mom sent me, hop inside." The doubt that you have trained into your child will keep them from believing it and perhaps keep them safe. A salesperson rings your doorbell. "I'm selling all kinds of stuff here, great products that'll probably change your life, just $99.95. If I can step inside and do a demonstration." Your doubt may keep you from getting scammed and maybe even allowing a predator access to the inside of your house. You open the fridge. You see a gallon of milk, the expiration date. I don't know, it's 3 days ago. I doubt this is still good. If I drink it, I might get sick. Your doubt will keep you from throwing up. Believers totally engage the engine of doubt when it comes to other faith claims. The Christian hears the Islamist apologist and they're like, "No, I totally doubt that. Muhammad rode into the heavens on a winged horse," or whatever. That sounds kind of sketch. The Muslim hears the Scientology claims about Xenu. That sounds totally bogus. I doubt that's true. I don't buy it. The Mormons doubt the doctrines of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Hell, even within one faith tradition, Christianity, the Methodists doubt the Baptists, doubt the Pentecostals, doubt the Calvinists, doubt the Lutherans, doubt the Catholics. I mean, it's crazy. Doubt engaged all the time. But apparently this is supposed to be a problem, and the people selling us the idea that it's a problem are those who are selling something they want us to buy without thinking. Ingersoll doubted the existence of gods, disbelieved in gods. He said this from the stage in 1880. "Each nation has created a god, and the god has always resembled his creators. He hated and loved what they hated and loved, and he was invariably found on the side of those in power. Each god was intensely patriotic and detested all nations but his own. All these gods demanded praise, flattery, and worship. Most of them were pleased with sacrifice, and the smell of innocent blood has ever been considered a divine perfume." Speaking truth to power in the face of the power players today, I got to wonder if Ingersoll would have been targeted today. Let's say his writings were made available in school libraries. Would the book banners have targeted this man? Our children cannot be exposed to this anti-God heresy. He is an enemy of religious liberty, spreading falsehoods. We must protect the generations. You think they'd grab his writings and throw them in boxes and take them out to be discarded or burned or at least filed away, buried somewhere, never to be seen again? how would they have treated the man who said these words? Orthodox religion is a kind of boa constrictor. Anything it cannot dodge, it will swallow. As ready as I am to continue introducing you to the great heretic, I got to take a short break. I'll be right back and we shall continue. Today is a show that is taking you back in time and also relating a man of our history to the times of the day. We're talking about Robert Green Ingersoll. And we've been speaking recently about the necessity of heresy. You know, I mentioned that blasphemy trial, right? Charles Reynolds on trial for heresy and Ingersoll's 3-hour defense. And in that oration, as he was speaking to the judge and jury, he said this, quote, "If you could only imprison a thought, then intellectual tyranny might succeed. If you could only take an argument and put a striped suit of clothes on it, if you could only take a good, splendid, shining fact and lock it up in some dungeon of ignorance so that its light would never again enter the mind of man, then you might succeed in stopping human progress. Otherwise, no." In a lot of ways, Ingersoll reminds me a little bit of Christopher Hitchens. And I'll tell you why. Christopher Hitchens was a pit bull, right? He was fearless, and he was strong, and he took no crap, and he gave no quarter. When he went in the room, look out, because you're not going to get patted on the head and treated with deference, at least when it comes to ideas. But even in debates with the most idiotic of opponents, and I won't mention names here, Dinesh D'Souza. And several others. Hitchens was the adult in the room. Now, sometimes he did raise his voice, but he wasn't just screaming. He didn't lose control. He wasn't trying to win by verve or volume. He didn't become unhinged. He didn't lose control. And in so many cases, I was just struck by the fact that if you watch a debate with Christopher Hitchens, he treated his interlocutors respectfully. Not necessarily their ideas. He'd go hard on the ideas, but he almost always respected their humanity. He would take questions from the audience. Yeah, some people got hitch slapped. It's true. But how many times did he field questions and challenges from devout believers or just people who had horrible ideas, and he would respond to them without calling them names, without carpet bombing them as human beings? And I really think Ingersoll was a lot like this. I think he was charitable with many Christians. 150 years ago, he wrote that arguments cannot be branded with insults. Kindness is strength. Anger blows out the lamp of the mind. In the examination of a great and important question, everyone should be serene, slow-pulsed, and calm. Now, again, I'm not saying he never lost his temper. And I'm not saying that there aren't times for us to get good and angry, to get into it. I'm not saying that. But in the overall, he realized that you're not going to insult people into being better people. Hey, dumbass. And someone says, you know what? You're absolutely right. I am a total dumbass, and I was wrong. Thank you for correcting me and setting me on the straight and narrow path. This just does not happen. I'm reminded of that quote from Melanie Tresick Green. She brought it to my attention. I don't know if she actually said it, but she runs the Thinking is Power website. And she brought to my attention this line, people won't care what you believe unless they believe that you care. Man, that is good. I'm using that. I'm stealing it or borrowing it. I'm applying it, right? People won't care what we believe unless they believe that we care. And I do not buy the lie that kindness is weakness. I think a lot of times it takes the stronger person to lower their voice, to be kind. Anybody can surrender to their rage. Anybody can just knee-jerk at anybody and everything that grates against them. Anybody can blow their stack at the drop of a hat. A reaction's easy. It doesn't have to be thoughtful. It doesn't have to use consideration. But if you're going to be the adult in the room, if you're going to be strong and firm and resolute and brave and committed to your values without throwing knives or throwing insults or throwing a tantrum, that is the Ingersoll way. Over the course of his life, at various times, he wrote things like this: "Kindness is the sunshine in which virtue grows. I would rather live and love where death is king than have eternal life where love is not. Hope is the only bee that makes honey without flowers. A great man is a torch in the darkness, a beacon in superstition's night, an inspiration and a prophecy. The superior man is the providence of the inferior. He is eyes for the blind, strength for the weak, and a shield for the defenseless. He stands erect by bending above the fallen. He rises by lifting others." Anyway, given my recent experience, the privilege of speaking at the Ingersoll Birthplace Museum, and because his writings have been so influential to me, sometimes I even quote him when I sign a book. Someone will bring me a book and they'll say, "Hey, would you sign one of your books?" And at the top, I'll write Ingersoll's quote. And it's one of my favorite quotes, perhaps ever. It's really my coda. Ingersoll said this: "The more false we destroy, the more room there will be for the true." And that's what I say to people who ask me, well, why do you have to speak out so much against religion? Why do you have to speak out so much against this, or this, especially given that it makes people happy? They use the happiness argument. And I respond, it's not enough that it makes someone happy. We must seek out and embrace what is true. The more false we destroy, the more room we make for the true. The more oxygen, the more elbow room, the more latitude, the more opportunities, the more power the true has in this world. Man, that's good. It just drives me. It drives many of us as we speak out against the cancer, the ignorance and the dogma and the bad agents. The more false we destroy, the more room there will be for the true. Robert Ingersoll, you can hear me, the world is still crazy. The satanic panic is still going on. The zealots are still killing us out there. And sometimes I feel overwhelmed by it all. But I take a lot of encouragement, and I have echoed many of the words that you wrote during your lifetime. You had no idea when you wrote this stuff in the 1800s that you would help this ex-evangelical when he escaped religion in 2008. You would have no idea who I am or the fact that I have borrowed so much of what you said as I have conversations in my own circles. But you are evidence that in many important ways, even though we don't believe in an afterlife, we can have an afterlife. The ripple of our lives can go on to influence, encourage, and inspire others for generations so that we too can be true to the loftiest and most generous promptings of the human heart. Let me finish with a series of various statements Ingersoll said that resonate today. He said, as more people become more intelligent, they care less for preachers and more for teachers. Give me the storm and tempest of thought and action rather than the dead calm of ignorance and faith. Banish me from Eden when you will, but first let me eat of the fruits of the tree of knowledge. I do not believe in forgiveness as it is preached by the church. We do not need the forgiveness of God, but of each other and of ourselves. In the republic of mediocrity, genius is dangerous. Take from the church the miraculous, the supernatural, the incomprehensible, the unreasonable, the impossible, the unknowable, the absurd, and nothing but a vacuum remains. The more a man knows, the more willing he is to learn. The less a man knows, the more positive he is that he knows everything. The truth shall make you free, but first it shall make you angry. Justice is the only worship. Love is the only priest. It may be that ministers really think that their prayers do good, and it may be that frogs imagine that their croaking brings spring. There is something wrong in a government where they who do the most have the least. There's something wrong when honesty wears a rag and rascality a robe, when the loving, the tender eat a crust while the infamous sits at banquets. Nothing discloses real character like the use of power. It is easy for the weak to be gentle. Most people can bear adversity. But if you wish to know what a man really is, give him power. This is the supreme test. It is the glory of Lincoln that having almost absolute power, he never abused it, except upon the side of mercy. And perhaps his most famous quote to finish us off. He once said, "Reason, observation, and experience, the holy trinity of science, have taught us that happiness is the only good, that the time to be happy is now, and the way to be happy is to make others so." Thanks for allowing me to introduce you to one of my inspirations, Robert Ingersoll, the most remarkable American most people have never heard of. Have a great week. I'll see you next time.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. For a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming Free Thought events and conventions, log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.